The wreck fell out of the sky like a dying star, trailing plasma and screaming metal, and it landed for kilometers from Kestrel, stationed with a sound that shook coffee cups off tables. Grace Holloway was the first one suited up and moving. She was chief engineer of a mining outpost that most of the Confederated systems had forgotten existed, a rust-streaked rock called Kestrel 9 hanging on the edge of chartered space. She had spent 11 years there fixing things other people had given up on: drills, reactors, marriages, her own needs. When the alarm blared and the sensor logs showed an alien warship the size of a cathedral, bleeding atmosphere into the void, her first thought wasn't fear. It was something that big doesn't crash unless it's already dead. She was wrong. It was dying, not dead, and that distinction would change everything. The hull was a language she'd never seen, black-violet plating that drank light instead of reflecting it, seams that pulse faintly like veins. Grace's team cut through an emergency airlock expecting corpses. Instead, they found one survivor, curled in a chamber shaped like a seed pod, wrapped in cables that weren't wired so much as something closer to nerves. She was enormous, 8 feet coiled into a crouch, skin the color of a bruised sunset, for eyes closed in what Grace could only describe as agony. A crown of bone-white spines rose from her skull, cracked in 3 places. When Grace's flashlight passed over her, one eye opened. It looked directly at Grace, not in a suit. At her. Fix. The word arrived in Grace's skull, without sound, without warning, and it hurt like a migraine detonating. Fix the vessel. Fix me. Grace should have run. Every training manual, every survival instinct, every horror movie she'd ever half-watched on a cargo run told her to run. Instead, she knelt down next to 8 feet of alien royalty bleeding something like blood. And she said, "Okay, where do I start?" Her name, translated imperfectly through the neural bridge the ship itself constructed for her, was something like Thesely Von Kor, though the ship's system settled on calling her the Queen because that was closer to true. Not a monarch of gold and velvet, a biological one, a high mother. Her species, the Ithai, were a collective consciousness spread across 9 worlds, and she was the seed from which all of them had grown, and she was dying. Because her ship's neural core, the organ-machine hybrid that kept her mind tethered to her body, had been shattered in a battle Grace never got the full story on, for 6 days. Grace didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. She spliced human alloy into an alien lattice. She rerouted Kestrel's reactor to feed a foreign heart. She learned, by trial and very nearly fatal errors, that high technology didn't obey Newtonian logic so much as negotiate with it. She talked to the ship like it was a stubborn old engine, because in the moment she stopped talking, it stopped listening. On the 4th night, the Queen spoke to her without the pain, clean and clear, the connection finally stabilizing. "You are small," the Queen said. "Your kind is small, short-lived, fractured into billions of separate minds, each one screaming its own name into the dark. I'd have seen worlds like yours consumed in a season." "Cool," Grace muttered, elbow deep in conduit. "Real comforting bedside manner, and yet you did not run. No time. You were dying on my table. I was dying on my own," the Queen corrected. "You chose to catch me." Grace didn't have a good answer for that, so she just kept working. On the 6th day, the neural core stabilized. The Queen rose from the seed pod chamber for the first time, unfolding to her full height, spines radiating themselves in real time, for eyes blazing gold instead of dim ember. Grace expected gratitude, a polite farewell, maybe a warship's worth of favors owed. What she got instead was the Queen crouching down to Grace's eye level, close enough that Grace could feel heat radiating off her like a furnace. "I want something more from you." Small engineer, Grace's hand drifted, instinctively, toward the plasma cutter clipped to her hip. "That's usually where these stories go bad, not what you fear." The Queen tilted her crowned head. "My people are dying, Grace Holloway, not from wounds, from sameness. We are one mind wearing 9 billion bodies. And a mind that never disagrees with itself does not grow. It calcifies. It repeats. We have not had an original thought in 400 years. She reached out one clawed hand, not to grab, but to hover, waiting for permission. Grace, after a long moment, let her. "You disagreed with your own fear. You disagreed with the odds. You looked at a dying God and decided, alone, unordered, unrewarded, that you would fix her anyway. That is a thing my entire species has forgotten how to do. I do not want your planet, human. I do not want your metals or your ships or your bones. I want you to teach me how to be one voice that still says no." Grace laughed, short, disbelieving. exhausted. You want rebellion lessons. From a mining engineer. I want humanity, the Queen said simply. Not conquered, not consumed. Consulted. So Grace Holloway, who had never once in her life imagined herself a diplomat, sat down on an overturned crate in the belly of a resurrected alien warship and started talking about the things that made humans humans. Stubbornness, grief that turned into music, the particular madness of choosing to love something you knew you'd eventually lose, the fact that every human argued with every other human about everything, all the time, and somehow that was the feature, not the bug. The Queen listened the way a starving thing listens. She asked questions that took Grace hours to answer and days to understand she'd answered wrong. Slowly, across weeks, the Confederated Systems never fully explained its own bureaucracy. Something unprecedented took root in the TIE Collective. Dissent, small at first, a ship refusing an order, a hive child asking why instead of obeying. Not chaos, Grace made sure of that, just texture. Just the beginning of 9 billion voices remembering they were allowed to be 9 billion, instead of 1. When the repaired warship finally launched, it didn't leave as a threat. It left as the first TIE vessel in recorded history to fly with a name painted, in careful human lettering, along its bow. Second opinion, the Queen's final message to Kestrel 9 was short. You did not just fix my vessel, Grace Holloway. You cracked something open in me that for centuries of my own kind could not touch. My people will remember the small, stubborn species that looked at a dying empire and said, I think I can save that, and then argued with it the entire time. Grace stood on the observation deck, watching the black violet hull shrink into starlight, and allowed herself, for the first time in 6 exhausting days, to smile. Yeah, she said to no one. That tracks. Behind her, the reactor hummed back to normal rhythms, and Kestrel 9 went back to being a forgotten rock at the edge of the map. Except now it was the rock where a queen had learned, from one tired engineer with grease on her hands, what it meant to be free.